I've known about this for a long time, but I did a little research on it this week. Do you know that there's some people in the world who hear a musical note, and at the same time, they see a corresponding color? And usually when they hear a note, it's a specific color over and over again, and it's a different color for each note. Very good. Others write a letter like the letter A, and they draw a shape like a triangle or a square, and they actually, even though they'll write it with a black pen or a pencil, they'll see it in a color. Same situation. Others see a color, and they'll immediately smell a corresponding scent that goes along with it. And it's called synesthesia. It's a neurological condition in which the stimulation of one sensory pathway, like hearing, simultaneously leads to the automatic, involuntary, you can't help it, experience of a second sensory pathway, like seeing. And it can be a combination of any of the senses, even more than one or more than two. And I know it sounds crazy, but lots of famous people in the world have had synesthesia, and it actually has contributed to some of their success. Like, for instance, David Hockney, considered one of the most influential British artists of the 20th century, was influenced by synesthesia during the 60s, during the pop art time. Those of you that are old enough to remember all the blacklight posters and things like that, he was in the middle of all that stuff, used to design stages, and synesthesia helped him to do that. Billy Joel says that synesthesia helped him become one of the most prolific songwriters in the world. The famous violinist Itzhak Perlman gives credit to his success in being able to see each note as a specific color, which enhances his emotional connection to the music and affects the way that he plays. And Joan Harris, the author of the highly sensory-driven novel Chocolat, or the movie, maybe you've seen the movie Chocolat, was influenced by her ability to experience colors as scents. And you can see it in that novel or in that movie. Well, today, as we continue in our Driven by Hope series through the book of 1 Peter, going to do this message. We'll end it next week, but we're going to discover today that we all have synesthesia when it comes to God's grace. Because according to Peter, God's grace comes in many colors. Do you know that? Listen to this. 1 Peter 4:10 says that each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. And the Greek word that in this verse for various forms, look it up, literally means many colors. In other words, God's works uniquely in everyone's life, and God's work is best described as a palette or a canvas, a work of art that's filled with beautiful and brilliant colors from every hue, from the darker tones to the lighter tones. And if you recall, Peter is writing to believers whose lives are being driven by fear in one way or another, but he gives them multiple reasons throughout this letter how to override their fears with hope. And in this passage that we're looking at today, Peter is reminding these fearful believers about the unique work of grace, this supernatural work of grace that God has done in each of their lives. And this is one of my favorite passages because the implications of this verse go really deep, and it's easy to miss the context. Many people simply link this passage to other Bible verses on spiritual gifts like 1 Corinthians 13, totally miss out on the deeper significance within this passage. These believers are living under the constant state of fear. And people who are in the middle of difficult life challenges often don't feel like they have anything to offer other people because their fear is resulting in stress, and it can be paralyzing. But for the last 4 chapters and all the way through the end of this letter, Peter is encouraging these believers over and over and over again not to succumb to fear, but to remember that they have a living hope beyond this life that can never perish, it can never fade, it can never spoil, and it's being preserved in heaven by God for them. And because of this living hope, they have something to offer others who are feeling hopeless due to the difficult life challenges that are going on in their life right now. Miss this context, and you will miss the entire point and depth of this passage. So let's break it down a little bit. There's a lot packed into this little sentence here. And first of all, let's look at who Peter is addressing. He starts out this verse by saying, each of you, which means that this exhortation is not just for a select few savvy people who aspire to leadership. It's for everyone, because listen, you got to get this. It's for everyone, because this is not about us. It's about what God is doing in us. It's the canvas that God is painting in our lives. What God is doing in us is translated in this verse as a gift. And the Greek word that's used here is charisma, charisma. It's where we get our English word charisma. And today when you think of someone who has charisma, we think of someone who has a magnetic personality, irresistible charm, a persuasive communicator. And yet, according to this passage, every believer has this kind of charisma, which includes every one of us. Everybody in this room has charisma. In fact, just kind of go with me. Just turn to somebody next to you on either side and just say, you have charisma. Come on. You really do, and you're going to find out why here. What exactly is this gift that Peter is talking about, and what does charisma mean in this passage? Peter says that everyone should use the gift or the charisma they've received, and the root of charisma is charis, which is the Greek word for, anybody know? Grace. It's where we get grace, which is defined as undeserved merit. In other words, we don't get what we deserve, we get what we need. That's what grace is. And when you add the ma sound to the end of charis, and you make it charisma, it means that there's a resulting action. In other words, God performs an undeserved supernatural work of grace in our lives, which should then result in some kind of action in us. We're all supposed to use this charis, this gift that God has given us. Now, if typically if you're pregnant, you start thinking of, what am I going to name my baby? And if you were to go in a book of baby names and you found the name Charisma, which is actually a name, it's a girl's name, which I'm guessing people don't use because I've never met anyone named Charisma. I met lots of people named Grace. But what a cool name. I'm actually hoping to start a trend with all 3 services. All you ladies that might be pregnant right now, let's just have a baby boom of charisma gals. Can you imagine? Hi, what's your name? I'm Charisma. Just a real attractive, kind of person. But anyways, if you look in those baby books, they all will tell you that what they say that the meaning of charisma is blessing. It means blessing. And in fact, charisma is translated blessing in the ESV version in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 through 11. Paul and his friends are like in dire straits. Their lives are in danger. And so he writes to Corinthians in verse 10, he says, God delivered us from such a deadly peril. I mean, they were like on the edge, but God delivered them. And he will deliver us. He will deliver us in the future. On him we have set our hope. And so Paul is choosing hope over fear here. And the hope is that God will deliver us again. And then he says to the Corinthians, you also must help us by praying. Pray for us so that many will give thanks on our behalf for the charisma, the blessing, the gift granted us through the prayers of many. And so Rabbi Saul, the Apostle Paul, is choosing to be driven by hope instead of fear. And he trusts that God will sustain him just like God is sustaining all the believers that Peter's writing to. And Paul's not leaving any stone unturned by stacking, and so he wants to stack the odds in his favor. And so he asked the Corinthians, to believers, to pray for him, to God on their behalf. And he already anticipates how thankful others will be when they hear, when they use their senses to hear and see how God has been faithful to sustain them in the future. Paul calls this charisma a blessing, an undeserved gift of supernatural grace in the face of difficult life circumstances. And I believe substituting our English word blessing is the best word that fits the context of the passage here in 1 Peter 4:10. It's kind of like, when you go through a really tough time in your life, most of us go through seasons, and sometimes those seasons are really, are really difficult. And a lot of times it could take weeks or months or even years. But, eventually you get through those periods of times. And when you get to the other side and you look back, you can see how it changed you, most of the time for the better. And so what do you say? You say, it was a blessing in disguise. And that's kind of the context, an undeserved, supernatural work of grace in the face of difficult life circumstances. And when I think of this concept, I think of Jacob. Jacob, his name hints that it means cheater or deceiver or conner, or liar. And he lived up to that title because he was a liar and he was a con and he was just a creep of a man, at least for a time. And at one point, Jacob finds himself kind of trapped between the deceptive life that he's been leading. Behind him, he's got his uncle Laban, who he conned, and in front of him, he's got his brother Esau, who he conned. And so at one point, Jacob he's all alone at night, and he's trying to figure out how to con his way out of this situation. And all of a sudden, God comes behind him and grabs him and begins to wrestle him. And this wrestling match lasts all night long, but it's kind of a wink match. It's fixed. It's a one-sided competition. He's not going to win this match, right? And so at one point, sometime during the night, God pops his hip joint out of place. It's excruciating. It's absolutely painful. But Jacob refuses to let go, and he just clings to God, and he says, I won't let go until you bless me. And God goes, all right, let's see, what can we come up with here? He goes, hey, what's your name? My name? Yeah, what's your name? My name is Deceiver. I'm a liar. I'm a con. That's right. You have been up until now. But this is a game-changing moment, Jacob. From now on, your name is going to be Israel. It means triumphant or prevails with God. And with that, God vanishes into thin air. And now armed with a new victorious identity, hopeful Israel rather than fearful Jacob begins to move forward towards his brother Esau, ready to face whatever consequences await him. And as he approaches Esau, who's got a mighty band of warriors, he's got a whole army with him. You can imagine that Jacob must have, seen him from a distance, and he must have been quite a sight to see. I mean, what are you going to look like after wrestling with God all night long, right? I mean, your clothes are probably going to be ripped to shreds. You're probably going to be covered with schmutz all over your face, and your arms. You maybe even have a few bloody scrapes here and there on your face or your legs. And oh yeah, Jacob now walks with a really noticeable limp. And so from a distance, Esau sees him, and he probably shouted out something like, Jacob, holy Moses, what happened to you? And I can imagine Jacob just kind of walking like this going, I got blessed. And I can also imagine maybe one of Esau's mighty warriors turning to another warrior and saying something like, he doesn't look like any blessed, victorious Christian I've ever seen. But he'd be wrong. Because blessed people often look broken, and they walk with a very noticeable limp in life. A sign, a constant reminder of where they got the charisma, the undeserved grace in the midst of difficult life circumstances, the blessing. Now, why should we use this blessing, this undeserved gift of grace God has given us? Peter says we should use this blessing to bless others by faithfully administering God's grace in its various colors. And the English word there, faithfully, is the Greek word that means stewardship. And it has this sense of being entrusted with a great responsibility. In other words, however God is working in your life, whatever your canvas looks like at the moment, no matter what stage that work of art is in, we are to be faithful stewards of the gift of grace by ministering to others who need some hope in their lives right now. And here's the absolute beauty and brilliance of how this works. We don't need to go to seminary to do this. We don't need to join Toastmasters to become an eloquent speaker. We don't even need our lives to be all nice and perfect and tidy. All we need to do is this. We just need to tell our story. It's so simple. It's the greatest value that you have is your story. The work that God is doing in you, whatever stage is it in. I had somebody earlier, we're going to do some sharing. I'm going to invite you all to come down and share your story. I had somebody share at the end of last service in tears that she felt sad that she didn't have a story because she hasn't heard from God in months since they moved to Boulder. Maybe it's more, I think it's more than months. I think it's years. And I said, that's your story. I mean, sometimes you get the darker tones in the paint. It takes a while before those lighter tones get on the canvas. But everybody has a story. All we need to do is share it, because remember, it's not about us, right? It's about what God's doing in us. Listen to this. Peter goes on in verse 11 to say, if anyone speaks, he should do it as he's speaking the very words of God. It's what God's doing in you. Let him speak through you. If anyone ministers, he should do it with the strength that God provides. It's not you, it's God in you. So that in all things God may be praised through Messiah Jesus. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. Everyone has a story. There's probably, I don't know, there's maybe about 200 people here this morning. There's probably about 600 stories in this room. More than that. Everyone has a story. Your canvas may be blank at the moment. You may look at your canvas and just go, I don't see anything. And that might be where you're at. It could be that there are some colors on your canvas, but you can't make out what it is yet. You know, it's like, well, what is God up to here? Or it could be that you're standing back and you're looking and you're going, wow, what a work of art. I never even imagined it could be so beautiful. No matter what stage your charisma is in, we all have a story to tell and a responsibility to tell our story so that others may be blessed. So what's your story? How has God been working in your life or not working? Who or what are you thankful for? What are you hopeful for? Think about it for a moment, will you? And while you're thinking, let's just sing that first chorus of Amazing Grace together, okay? Just to kind of stimulate this. Some of you are going to come down and share this story. We've had dozens, literally dozens of stories this morning. I didn't even know where second service ended last service, because it just, as you were showing up, it was still going on. So we'll just keep doing it. But Amazing Grace, right? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. I've got 2 mics here, and so you could come down, and one person could be here, and the other person waiting, and we could just kind of do this. And I know it's hard, because it's hard to get that pump primed. You get nervous, but you know that nervousness is God working in you. It's important that we hear what God is doing in your life with each other. And the whole lesson here this morning is not to just do it here, but just to have a cup of coffee with somebody and say, this is what God's been doing in my life. You don't need anything more than that. That's the most powerful resource you have. So who's going to be first? What's going on in your life? Come on down. Sister Susan? Oh, okay. Yeah, we got 2 mics, so come on. You can both come. There you go. You can just move it out. Susan, you can just kind of be waiting here.
I have a noticeable limp.
Here, we'll just move this out a little bit.
Thanks.
So you don't have to crunch.
My name is Mary Christian, and I moved to Boulder about 6 months ago. And the reason I thought I was moving was to get married. And my story, the theme of my story, is just that none of us are victims and that I'm not a victim. I thought I was coming to get married, and shortly after I got married, I got pregnant, and shortly after that, I lost my baby, and shortly after that, my husband left. And I was just devastated. I mean, devastated is a small word compared to what I was feeling. And I just had friends that told me, even before I left, Mary, you're moving there for something much bigger than a marriage. But all I could see was a marriage, and God pulled the rug out from under me. He's sovereign, His love, He's plucked me out of darkness into His marvelous light. And my 16-year-old left everything and left her whole social circles and everything and came out here. And I even had to leave 2 kids in California with my ex-husband. And so there was a lot of big things that were on my heart. And I was just like, Lord, what the heck are you doing? And He didn't give me an answer to my situation. What He did was told me to go out onto Pearl Street and to start ministering. I'm like, I have nothing to give. I have nothing to give. But it was in the middle of feeling so lack in myself that all I could do was just walk out there and be obedient. And I tell you what, for every 5 people that I spoke to, 4 people were giving their hearts to Jesus. And it wasn't me leading them in a prayer either. They were praying and crying out in their own words to the Lord. And probably the most remarkable thing that happened in that 1 month that I was out there, just sharing Jesus in the middle of my brokenness, was that a young man who was living out of his car, he just started contacting me and letting me kind of walk through life with him. And I just think back, and I'm so humbled and I'm so awed because, his whole life was changed, not just his, but other people's lives too. And in the process, my whole life was changed. And I'm not a victim of circumstance. I'm not a victim of losing a baby. I'm not a victim of my husband leaving. I'm not a victim of any of that stuff. I'm a victim of God's love. And His love is so good that even in the middle of what seemed like the worst nightmare of my life, He was shining and showing me how beautiful brokenness is, how beautiful surrender is, how beautiful it is to get to the end of myself and just let Him take over. And so, there's that promise for all of us that He works all things together for our good. So even the stuff that the enemy wants to use for evil in my life, God's got the last word in my life. I'm only a victim of His love.
Ooh, thank you.
Hard act to follow.
It is on, and I forgot to mention to make sure, and you did great, Mary, so this is not about you, just to give the Reader's Digest version so we get,
Okay.
I know there's going to be a lot more. Oh, yeah, great. So a minute or 2.
Okay, my story is one of just great hope. I have given my heart to Jesus because of my experience in this church and in our group Thrive. A little plug for Thrive. And I just wanted to read something from our book that we're working on today, and it says, regardless of how worthy or unworthy you feel, God can use you exactly where you are to help others to grow in their faith or build a ministry. If you will simply share what you know about truth in your life, no matter how small it may seem to you, God will use it. So I'm just so grateful for this church, and I have so much hope. I've had a lot of health challenges recently, and I feel so much better now, and I'm just in a place of real gratitude and hope, so thank you.
All right. We've got about 298 stories to go. Who's going to be next?
So, hope I can get through this.
We'll help you.
So, my story started a long time ago. When I was about 9, my parents divorced, and I have a large family. I have 7 siblings, and it was pretty nasty, big rifts. And when I was a little bit older, my grandparents had a farm in East Texas where the entire family would gather for all kinds of occasions. And my dad drove 6 of us kids out there to meet his family for the first time and just really see what family was all about. And as we got ready to drive home from that trip, my grandfather prayed that one day our entire family would be there at that farm as a family, my mom included, and all of my siblings. And at the time, that seemed like an impossible prayer. A lot of time passed, and both of my grandparents passed away. But they never stopped believing that our family would be whole again. And in 2010, after 21 years of separation, my parents remarried. And the process started. And this year, for Thanksgiving, my entire family made the journey to our family farm. And as I sat there, realizing that I was seeing the answer to my grandfather's prayer, and realizing that the faithfulness of God is not always something that we will live to see, but that doesn't mean that he's not faithful, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't answer prayer. And to be there 22 years after my grandfather prayed that prayer with my family whole again was amazing. Is probably the best gift I could have ever asked for. So.
That's awesome. While they're coming down, let's sing that chorus in Amazing Grace that says, my chains are gone. Come on. I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, his mercy reigns. Unending love, unending grace. Hi.
I'm really good with technology.
You can just take it right out.
Hi, my name is Feather. And before I was dropped off in Boulder in January 2nd of this year at the homeless shelter, I hermitized myself. I lived alone in my apartment, and I drank all my inheritance up for 5 years because my mother died. My mother died. And I wanted to die and be with my father and my mother and Jesus. But now I have crawled out from underneath my rock, and I became alive in Boulder. And through the blessing and all the beauty of Boulder, and through the people and the love and the Lord put these people in my path. Now I want to live and prosper through him. And I am so blessed, and I have grace, and I am and have charisma. And because I want to live, and because I want to prosper, is because I and my community have lost someone very special. On Wednesday, a friend of mine was alone and lonely, and he got drunk, and he fell into the creek, and he froze to death, and he was alone. And he was always telling me, every time he and his wife would see me, that they were so very blessed to have known me and to love me. And I ask that you keep his wife lifted up in your heart so that she may be strong and have charisma again after losing her husband. Thank you, and God bless you all.
I have to put this one.
Come on. Here, we'll just pass this along.
My senior, is it on? My senior in college, there we go. I had everything together on the outside, but was so lonely and empty and broken, and had gone on a search for the Lord. And he sent me off to Sweden, and I thought it was going to be to study abroad and to have a blast. And instead, he stripped me of everything that I had or knew. And sometime that fall, alone in my room, I was reading scripture, and I realized that Jesus had died, not for everyone, but just for me. And I wept into my Bible, and I don't know what day it was. I don't even know what month it was. Earlier that summer, I had met a man on a streetcar in Minneapolis. Long, crazy story. He became a father figure to me. He was 30 years older than I was. And that December, he says, "Hey, I'm going to be in Stockholm, and you're in Sweden. We should come down and connect." And so I'm like, yes, that's awesome. So I had given my life to Christ already, and he didn't know that. He's a follower of Jesus. And 2 days before I went to fly down there, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I was a total wreck. And so I go down to Stockholm and just pour my story out to this man named Ian. And the next morning, or the Sunday morning, we're walking through Old Town, and it says, "Hey, Nelson Mandela to speak here today after he's won the Nobel Prize." And so I got to go to that service and for the first time take communion from Nelson Mandela after pouring out my story to my friend Ian, who I met on a streetcar after giving my life to Jesus in my room by myself. God can do great things.
So it's interesting. About 2 years and 6 months, I was up on the stage leading the worship, transitioning and stuff. This is the first time I've been back in front of this mic in 2.5 years. And the reason why was my wife and I, and by the way, my story's not over. Isn't that the beautiful thing? But I realized, and matter of fact, I'm getting kind of jumbled because I'm trying to put in what I need to say and leave out what I don't. But a beautiful thing is what Gene mentioned this morning is that God's grace comes in all kinds of colors, but it also comes in all kinds of ways. And so one day I get a call, and Gene said, "Eric, Brian and I would like to meet with you." I felt like I was going to the principal's office, which turns out that's what it kind of was. And they basically said, "Eric, after 20 years of ministry full-time, we think you need to take a break. And we also think you need to see a psychiatrist, and we think you might have an emotional disorder." Now, I don't know how that hits you, but the way that hit me was, I am useless. I can't be used by God again. And I'm a failure. And my identity was in what I had done for 20 years. But I want you to know, Elisa and I, my wife and family, have been here for 14 years at this church. And I want you to know, looking back on that, was, thank you, first of all, and we've already met and talked about it, was one of the most loving things anybody has ever done to me in my life. Because he basically said, "Gene and Brian, we love you, but we think you need a timeout." And frankly, I didn't know what I was going to do. in the early 80s or the late 80s, I'd gotten my nursing degree, and I realized I don't know what's going to happen. And frankly, Gene told me later, we as an elder board didn't know what was going to happen. And so I went and applied for several jobs, and God provided. And I can remember for a while I sat back in the corner, and we still do, by the way. But I realized Sunday after Sunday I would cry on the way to church, and then Monday through Wednesday, we worked 3 12s a week. I would cry every night on my way going to work and saying, God, are you there? Do you care? Are you involved? And you know what? He said nothing. He said absolutely nothing, except, I love you. And he also said, my grace is sufficient, for it is my power, not yours, added by me, perfected in your weakness. And I realized these past 2.5 years that God is using me more than he ever has. I've been able to pray with people at our hospital. I've been able to lead people to Christ. I've been able to encourage men and women who have cancer. I've been able to do things that I never would have been able to do had Gene and Brian and our elders not said, it's time for you to take a break. The last thing I'll add is, and the reason why I said first thing, Gene, was I'm not done. Lisa and I still struggle. We still struggle with our children. It's one of the reasons I love this guy and his wife, is because they're real. But I want you to know, I really do. If you got nobody to talk to, if you got no place to go, this is a great place for you. Because time after time, through hardships and pain and sorrow, God's grace has shown up in this church for our life and for our family. Thanks.
Took a lot of courage for Eric to hang in there. Sometimes, you step out and you say some tough things and people don't hang in there. Eric, it just says a lot about your character to hang in there and let God do his thing. So I love you for that. Let's stand up. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Your story is the greatest asset that you have. And it doesn't matter what form it's in or what color it is at the moment. It's your story. It's what God's doing in you. It's the most powerful tool that you have. Most of you probably came to faith because of someone else's story. And that's how God works. This is a story right here. This is God's story. And in that story, he's our Redeemer. He comes to rescue us. He comes to give us grace. He gives us unmerited favor. We don't deserve it. He doesn't give us what we deserve. He gives us what we need. In this case, he takes the penalty for us. He dies in our place. It's an amazing story. It's sometimes it gets so, you hear it so much, you lose connection with it. But hear it again and hear it fresh today. God broke his body and he spilled his blood. That's his grace to us. And it's amazing. And as those of you that have come forward to take the elements today, and we've got wine and juice, and even Jesus' gluten-free body is up here in the cups. So it's a unique ring, right? This is my gluten-free body broken for you. You can see him saying that, right? Because he cares about those who have food allergies. So just notice what you're taking, but notice more importantly, notice that this is God's charisma. This is grace in action right here. This is the Ma of Charis like you've never seen it. The mother of all Ma's, I guess, is what it is. And so we're not going to have an official ending. Last service we didn't either. We ran out of time. I know there's a lot more stories that could be told. The whole point is grab somebody and just share your story. And just put a period right there and let them respond. You don't have to be preachy. You don't have to know all of the theology that goes with it. Just share your story. It's your greatest asset. So I'm just going to pull off the lids of all of these things. You come down. It's going to be very chaotic. The security team here just hates me for doing this. The ushers will be at the end, at the doors with buckets so you can put your cups in as you're leaving. You go back to your seats. You can come down and kneel. You can do whatever you want. And Aaron's just going to do something. Yeah, he'll be here all day. So come on down.